The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, content creators, or the production company.
You may already have good systems in place, but are they helping you create the biggest possible impact? Or are time, money, and opportunities still being lost? We work with service businesses and founders to find the highest value ways to use AI and maximize ROI with automation and technology. The goal is simple: better customer outcomes, more time, greater capacity, and less wasted spending. Are you open to discovering what is possible? Visit setupshoponline.com to schedule your free 1-hour Zoom strategy session, send a text, or call directly. What are you waiting for? You get us for 1 hour, free. Book a Zoom call now.
Welcome to the Foundations of Freedom with Jerome Huyler. A strong, vigorous economy runs on a division of labor. While some produce the goods, others provide the services we, the people, need and want. But behind everything we do, our work, our businesses, our daily lives, are the political decisions our leaders make in our name. Since we elect the men and women who write the laws that create the conditions in which we all prosper or perish, we all need to be fully informed political participants. The silent majority can no longer afford to remain silent. One of the most valuable services a free people require is the clarification of complex social, economic, and political ideas. Other media platforms offer biting commentary on the hot-button headlines of the day. This podcast service will explore the underlying causes of and the effective cures for what ails us. And this nation is ailing. Ultimately, to preserve the American dream, we will have to retrieve the principles that made that dream possible. But there are more pressing issues and concrete decisions to consider. So please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Foundations of Freedom with Jerome Huyler, episode number 24. Can you believe it? In the last few episodes, we traced how America's founding principles were built on natural rights, reason, limited government, and the moral right of each person to live freely. We also looked at how bad philosophy slowly pulled America away from those principles. Today, Jerome Huyler brings us to the thinker he believes offers the antidote. Their name is Ayn Rand. Now, Rand is controversial, misunderstood, and often reduced to slogans. But Jerry's focus today is not on a caricature. It's on her philosophy, objectivism, and why he believes it recovers the moral foundation of life, liberty, property, and limited government. So, Jerry, let's start here, okay? How can philosophy get back on the right track? How can we recover the understanding that let Jefferson's generation, for example, speak of our natural rights to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness? What is going to enable us to retrieve our natural rights and keep them for good?
Fortunately for us, the late 20th century produced a philosopher who retrieved the principles and premises that first informed America's founders. She was born in Russia, escaped to the United States, and more than retrieved the philosophy that built America with Aristotle and Locke, Ayn Rand agreed that the source of all human knowledge is the evidence of reality provided by our senses. The essence of the empiricist approach to philosophy, as opposed to the rationalist approach that most, especially German philosophers, practiced. She repudiated the whole rationalist tradition of speculating from abstract and unwarranted suppositions, and self-consciously pursued the empirical project. That is what she accomplished.
So, since so few Americans pay attention at all to philosophy or the issues with which it deals, I dare say few of us know anything about Ayn Rand's work as a philosopher. Who was Ayn Rand?
Ayn Rand was a writer and public speaker who lived from 1905 to 1982. In fact, she died the same March weekend in which the actor John Belushi, Bluto in Animal House, passed away. Ayn Rand is best known as a novelist. She wrote The Fountainhead, which was made into a movie starring Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal. Her greatest novel was called Atlas Shrugged. It was the story of a man who said he would stop the motor of the world and did exactly that. In the novel and in real life, that motor, creative intelligence, applied for the benefit of human life, was disappearing due to socialist political policies being widely diffused through America and the West. Socialism is the dreaded social force Ayn Rand set out to defeat. It is the battle we are in to this day. Many commentators say we are losing that battle, and life in America will grow ever more worrisome as a result. Parenthetically, you can see the impact of Zoran Mamdani, of so many socialists, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, rising to prominence in today's political world. Miss Rand is far less known for what she achieved as a philosopher than she is as a novelist. After the release of Atlas Shrugged in 1957, Ayn Rand devoted the rest of her life to constructing a full-blown philosophy of nature, man, and government. Her thoughts were published in a series of popularly written essay collections. One such collection was called The Virtue of Selfishness. It featured a series of essays that covered the principles of moral philosophy or ethics. She concluded those essays with a complete, comprehensive explanation of government's true, essential, and only purpose. She did that in two essays called Man's Rights and The Nature of Government. Another book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, treated both political and economic issues from a historical and theoretical perspective. She also released a lesser-known monograph entitled An Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. And again, parenthetically, our audience should go back to the episode, What is Philosophy?, to get a better idea of what epistemology is, the subjects that it covers, and why it is among the most important of philosophical branches. To the end of her life, Ayn Rand published additional essay collections on social, political, and cultural topics, and spoke in front of wildly enthusiastic audiences. Ayn Rand labeled her philosophy objectivism. She repudiated the rampant subjective and skeptical traditions that prevailed in her day and still prevails in ours. Subjectivism, as in the modern movement of postmodernism, all but reigns supreme in Western philosophical circles down to this day.
What is so different about Ayn Rand's way of thinking, Jerry? What allowed her to see so much further than have the rest of the world's greatest philosophers?
As against the bulk of modern philosophers, Ayn Rand built her speculations from the ground up. With Aristotle and Locke, she denied that individuals have innate ideas, or that knowledge can be deduced from a set of arbitrary, abstract suppositions. All knowledge, Ayn Rand stressed, begins with the evidence of reality provided by our five senses. Seeing similarities and differences among what we perceive, we form concepts. They enable us to explicitly identify and integrate our sensory perceptions. As we discussed in episode number 21, we start with actual apples, pears, peaches, and plums, and we derive the overarching concept, fruit. We combine fruit and vegetables and come up with the concept, produce. We go on to consider meat, nuts, soup, cereal, snacks, etc., and arrive at the concept, food, the highest order concept there. In time, we draw inductive generalizations. For example, we all need nutritious food to stay strong and healthy. And we draw deductive conclusions. For example, don't consume hemlock. It's definitely not good for you. Concepts allow us to form general principles to guide our actions. For example, eat wholesome foods, avoid poison. Those principles comprise a how-to guide to do just about anything. They allow for practical manuals on how to repair automobiles, build computers, or install a sink. Most important of all, they announce the rules that will prove most conducive to the successful conduct of human affairs. Concepts, Ayn Rand realized, identify what is in common between two or more perceptual concretes or earlier formed concepts. Thus, ages ago, Aristotle defined man as a rational animal, the animal that can think, project future prospects, and learn from past experience. Individual men can differ in 1,000 ways. Some are taller, shorter, stronger, weaker, smarter, faster, more or less energetic, etc. Ayn Rand thus concluded that the process of concept formation is a process that omits specific measurements and considers what is basically in common among two or more items or experiences. Thus, chairs come in an infinite variety of shapes, sizes, colors, material, and construction processes. They can be heavy or light, made out of wood, plastic, aluminum, cast iron, or straw. In forming the concept, We eliminate all measurements and wind up with, quote, the definition, a man-made utilitarian item designed to support the weight of a person when sitting. If that's what it is, a chair. If the object is designed to support the weight of a person when sleeping or laying down, it is a bed. If it is designed to support the weight of a person or other smaller objects, for example, books, dinnerware, appliances, computers, printers, record players, etc., it is a broader or more abstract concept still. It is a piece of furniture. It might be a desk, table, bed, or bookcase. In her little-known Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, Ayn Rand put René Descartes' universal doubt to rest. The 17th century thinker thought his senses could be deceiving him. Rand roundly denied the claim. She focused her attention on a few fundamental axioms of thought. Here I must quote her. No one has ever said it better. An axiomatic concept is the identification of a primary fact of reality, which cannot be analyzed, cannot be reduced to other facts or broken into component parts. It is implicit in all facts and in all knowledge. It is the fundamentally given and directly perceived or experienced, which requires no proof or explanation, but on which all proofs and explanations rest. It is impossible to doubt an axiom. Everything one says or does is ultimately grounded in the axioms one allegedly doubts. There are three such axiomatic concepts that cannot be further reduced or explained. Existence is the first axiomatic concept. It subsumes everything that did, does, or will exist. For example, every chair, truck, airplane, couch, mouse, meal, song, thought, action, historical event, heroic figure or coward, etc. This concept is translated into a declarative statement generating an axiom of human understanding, to wit, existence exists. That is the first axiom. It has to be accepted even in the process of trying to deny it. To what does this concept existence refer? This concept omits every conceivable measurement, every attribute anything that exists possesses. All that exists may differ in every particular, but they all share a single trait, to wit, they did, do, or will exist. Thus, chair subsumes every utilitarian man-made object designed to support the weight of a person when sitting, from the original invention way back in ancient history till the end of time. The second axiomatic concept is identity. This simply means that what is what it is, nothing more, nothing less. This law of identity generates a necessary corollary, a law of non-contradiction. A thing cannot be and not be a certain thing at the same time and in the same respect. Ayn Rand defined logic as the art of non-contradictory identification. Where someone admits a contradiction into his consciousness, it's clear he or she is mistaken. There are no contradictions in reality. If they appear in our thought, our conclusions about reality, we know that those thoughts, those conclusions have got to be false. The third axiomatic concept is consciousness. Consciousness is conscious of existence. The things we hear, see, touch, taste, or smell or learn about are real. They exist. That's why we become aware of them. The thing about these axioms is that one must admit them even in the process of denying them. When Descartes said he could be dreaming or imagining that what he sees when he's awake is real, he failed to grasp that if there was no reality, the state of dreaming would not exist. Just like if there is no property, there can be no theft. Descartes was stealing the concept of reality at the moment he thought he could deny the existence of all he perceived. Now, consider the status of causality. Remember, David Hume denied any causal connections. David Hume thought, yes, there is constant conjunction, but we can't prove that anything causes another thing to happen. Is the universe such that one thing causes another to happen? David Hume, as I just said, rejected all causal connections. He could only find constant conjunctions and claimed that we cannot attribute cause and effect to the events we observe. Yet, every time we have seen X, we then see Y. But, said Hume, we cannot experience the future and so have no way of knowing if what happened yesterday will happen again tomorrow. Ayn Rand had no difficulty asserting that X caused Y to happen. The law of identity tells us that anything is what it is and can do only what it can do. To Miss Rand, the law of causality is simply the law of identity applied to action. The chemical composition of a diamond is such that it will, if rubbed against a pane of glass, put a scratch into the surface of the glass. That is its nature. The nature of a diamond is such, and the nature of glass is such, that a diamond will cut glass, but glass will never cut a diamond. Or consider the ancient Aristotelian syllogism. All living things are mortal. Since men are living things, they too are mortal. That is a fact of life. So we can be sure that David Hume, like any other living creature, will live for a time, then pass away. That's for certain. It's in the nature of life that all things eventually grow old, contract infirmities and illnesses, and sooner or later pass away. That is inescapable. Did Hume think for a moment that he may be alive forever? Not likely. Let's turn our attention now to issues dealing with moral matters, or what we call ethics. David Hume assured his audience that moral statements are mere opinions. There are no objective ethical truths that human reason is capable of uncovering. In short, no number of facts, said David Hume, can ever yield a value. There is no necessary connection between what is and what ought to be. Ayn Rand smashed Hume's radical skepticism to bits. Hume's claim that no is can generate a sure and certain ought is plainly mistaken. Men can discover objective values if they can arrive at a sure and certain standard of value, one that is for certain and beyond dispute. Ayn Rand discovered such a standard. It is life itself. That which extends and enhances life is the good. That which threatens or shortens life is the evil. Where there is no life, for example, on the surface of the moon, there are no values. It is only with the emergence of life that values come into play and can be identified. Where life exists, so must value, since life is conditional and not guaranteed. Thus, Ms. Rand concluded in her essay, The Objectivist Ethics, which appears in the book, The Virtue of Selfishness, quote, in answer to those philosophers who claim that no relation can be established between ultimate ends or values and the facts of reality, let me stress that the fact that living entities exist and function necessitates the existence of values and of an ultimate value, which for any given living entity is its own life. The fact that a living entity is determines what it ought to do. So much for the issue of the relation between is and ought, unquote. Again, that is from the essay, The Objectivist Ethics, in the book, collection of essays called The Virtue of Selfishness. Having located an objective basis of human evaluation, a standard by which to measure the beneficial or detrimental relationship of any aspect of reality to ourselves, Ayn Rand went on to recognize the essential attribute that distinguishes men from the lower animals. Animals act on instinct. They do what nature has programmed them to do for the sake of their survival. Men are different. They must discover what is and isn't good for them, then initiate the actions that will achieve the good and avoid the evil. Men have choice. They have free will. They can avoid becoming aware of what is good or bad for them, but they cannot avoid the consequences of that avoidance. If they consume significant portions of a poison, they will grow weak and die, whatever they may want to do. And for every human being, his or her life is the objective standard by which to judge the beneficial or harmful relationship of any aspect of reality to his or herself. The job of moral philosophy is to identify the patterns of behavior that will allow men to live and thrive. These patterns are known as virtues. One must practice the virtues in order to obtain the values the contingencies of life dictate. In The Objectivist Ethics, Ayn Rand named the virtues that are necessary for a successful and happy life. In this, Ayn Rand followed the ancient classical philosophers, Aristotle, Cicero, Marcus Aurelius, and other Stoic philosophers. They posted 4 moral virtues they said men must practice to be happy and successful in life. These virtues were 1, prudence, 2, courage, 3, moderation, and 4, justice. Rand did not dispute this account of virtue, but improved the list by identifying 7 cardinal virtues: rationality, productiveness, pride, honesty, integrity, independence, and justice. Rationality is the first virtue. It is equivalent, basically, to the classical virtue of prudence. It leads to the discovery of every other value and virtue that sustains life and makes life worth living. The remaining virtues are all derived from one's commitment to being rational in what all one thinks, says, and does. Honesty is one pressing virtue every human being should practice. Why? What is honesty? It is not just deciding not to lie to one's parents or spouse in order to avoid trouble or gaining a bad reputation. It is the determination. Honesty is the determination to see the world as it actually is and to not pretend that what isn't or that what isn't is. Rand wondered, how can anyone expect to deal successfully with life if he or she isn't prepared to see it for what it actually is? Independence is a second cardinal virtue. It is the determination to stand on one's feet, look at the world through one's own eyes, and follow one's own chosen path in life as determined by what one independently appraises to be the truth. A person diminishes himself by becoming dependent on others for his or her keep. And there is an intellectual component to this virtue. It calls upon individuals to stand on their own feet, look at the world through their own eyes, and stay true to their vision of reality. That is what it means to be independent. Too many today rely on the opinion of others. Many young people are trapped in the politically correct canards of the day for fear of being abandoned and ostracized by their peers. Let a college student once express a heartfelt respect for capitalism or for Donald Trump, and his or her life will suddenly grow much lonelier. That introduces the virtue of integrity. Integrity can be thought of being honest when having to pay a price for one's honesty. Integrity is honesty when put under fire. To practice justice is to see that individuals get and are given what they deserve, for better or worse. Justice holds everyone responsible for the choices they make and the actions they take. One way or the other, individuals should pay for what they choose to do. Unlike Christianity or other religions that say pride goeth before the fall, Rand believed that one who has made him or herself able to live and worthy of living should feel a deserved, a just self-respect or self-esteem. It is an honest and just recognition of the facts. One should do good and feel good about what one has done. It is just a just reward for all one has achieved. Does all this amount to a greed-filled lust for personal gain? Is Rand recommending abject selfishness? Yes and no. One must do for oneself, but not at others' expense. If selfishness demands that some be sacrificed for the benefit of others, then Rand did not favor selfishness. Her ideal was of every individual living for his or her own sake and voluntarily trading his or her labor, talents, produced goods and services with others for the benefit of all. The main character in her novel Atlas Shrugged vows, quote, that I will never live for the sake of another, nor ask another to live for my sake, unquote. It's the American creed and tells all to simply live and let live. Rounding out the 7 cardinal virtues, Ayn Rand named productiveness. The need to be productive arises from the contingencies of life. Before anyone can consume, someone has to produce what will be consumed. Anyone who is productive, anyone who contributes to the store of consumable goods, even if it's just driving an over-the-road tractor trailer, is being productive. From this moral position, Ayn Rand spun out a political philosophy indistinguishable from John Locke's philosophy that was produced in the 17th century. His proclamation of natural, inherent, and individual rights. If you want to restore American greatness, you will have to fight for the principles that made America great to begin with. Again, see episode 19, where I discuss how limited government was meant to be. Rand echoes Locke, who echoed Cicero in the Roman Republic. All men are created equal in the Aristotelian sense of having specific needs and specific capacities for satisfying those needs. That's the sense in which all men are created equal. In civilized society, men and women need the freedom to use their capacities so as to satisfy their needs. That which promotes liberty in all its guises, for example, freedom of speech, the press, religious liberty, and respect for private property, is the good. That which threatens or shortens liberty is the evil. Thus, with Locke, Rand identifies man's natural rights with which government may not interfere. That is the sense in which, as Jefferson said, all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Ayn Rand insists that one of the certain unalienable rights every man and woman possesses is the right to property. This is the right to gain, keep, use, trade, or otherwise dispose of one's freely acquired possessions. With Adam Smith, Ayn Rand promoted laissez-faire free market capitalism. In her economic writings, she stressed government's true role It was to be a protector and not a provider. If all are created equal, none are entitled to anything for which others must pay. A free society cannot tolerate even a smidgen of corporate welfare, let alone social welfare. Government must leave its hands off the economy, neither harming through regulation nor helping through subsidies and other special privileges some businesses and industries at consumers' or taxpayers' expense. This, then, is the bare bones outline of Ayn Rand's comprehensive philosophy of nature, man, government, and civilization. If you want to learn more about Ayn Rand's moral and political ideas, and for all our sakes, I hope you do, you can pick up The Virtue of Selfishness. It's a book of short essays. I recommend first The Objectivist Ethics, then Man's Rights, then The Nature of Government. If you want to learn more about her theory of knowledge, see An Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, or pick up a book called Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, written by her intellectual heir and lifelong friend, Leonard Peikoff, Peikoff. It says all there is to say about objectivism, the name Ayn Rand gave to her life-saving philosophy.
Jerry, that brings us to the most important question. If the American people actually recover Ayn Rand's wonderful worldview, what will they then be expected to do to revive the nation and put it on a course towards sustained growth, expanded opportunity, and maybe economic prosperity?
If individuals own what they earn, the answer is obvious. Taxes must be dramatically reduced so that families can spend what is theirs any way they see fit. But the need to cut taxes is not a primary. What must be cut is the excessive levels of public spending that make ever-rising taxes necessary. For a detailed plan to cut reckless levels of public spending, see my earlier podcast episodes, especially numbers 5 and 6. There I detail specific budgetary items that can and should be cut or eliminated. The basic aim is to eliminate spending on corporate and social welfare programs. What is welfare? It is pork, bacon, earmarks, member items, constituent services, protective tariffs, farm and business subsidies, bank bailouts, pay to play, and too big to fail policies. Without touching Social Security and Medicare, benefits Americans paid into and so feel totally entitled to collect, public spending can still be substantially cut. At the end of the cost-cutting journey, we should understand that government's sole role is to protect us in the enjoyment of what is ours. The only service that is truly essential are 1, spending for national defense, and 2, law enforcement and justice. Achieve that result, and taxes eventually can be cut 75%. We are currently spending over 75% on all manner of programs that transfer wealth from public losers to public winners. Look it up. But I must emphasize one last point. The reason to cut spending is not to free up the free market and build a prosperous economy. Commercial and industrial growth and expanding opportunity will be the result of that spending cutting. But that is beside the point. At root, the issue is not practical, it is moral. The reason to eliminate government's power to redistribute the people's property is that it is their property. The aim of the exercise must to restore every American's natural, inalienable, individual right to gain, keep, use, trade, or otherwise dispose of his or her freely acquired possessions. To restore America's greatness, and remember, a nation is as great as it is free, we will need to retrieve the principles that made her great to begin with. Thankfully, Ayn Rand did the necessary work for us all.
Wow, Jerry, thanks again. So, how can folks learn more from and about Ayn Rand? You mentioned her book. Maybe you want to mention some repeat for people who may not be familiar with her publications and other things. Let people know how can they learn more about her.
As I've said, I recommend the book called The Virtue of Selfishness. It's a collection of essays, beginning with the essay, The Objectivist Ethics. That is where she validates her own ethical principles. She states them all, explains why they are the moral principles men and women should follow. And at the end, she discusses man's rights, how they are to be derived, and the nature of government that follows and respects and applies man's rights to political policies and programs. Or if one wants a comprehensive treatment of her entire philosophy, Objectivism, the answer then is to get the book Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. In its shortened form, it's called OPAR, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, by Leonard Peikoff. Again, that's Peikoff. That is a complete treatment of her philosophy from metaphysical fundamentals all the way to political and aesthetic principles that follow from those fundamentals. There are several biographies of Ayn Rand that one can look up if one wishes to discover the life she led. Or I say a good beginning for someone who prefers novels is to read The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. That is the literary expression of her whole philosophy. In other words, I would say her philosophy is derived from the characters and the events in her two major novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So one gets a very good idea of the characters that she recommends for all of us, the character she recommends by following the figures in her two main novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged.
All right, Jerry, thanks for that. For those folks who may not be familiar with her work or may want to learn more, I'm sure you could find it on Amazon and other places on the web. But it is time for our lightning round, Jerry. Let me throw a few quick questions at you and just try to answer them as succinctly as possible. Ready?
Yep.
First question. For someone listening who has always heard Ayn Rand described as selfish, extreme, or something else, what is the one misunderstanding you would like to clear up first?
Okay, Ayn Rand wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. In our culture, selfishness is regarded as an evil. Therefore, Ayn Rand must be evil by that standard. But there is a distinction between being selfish, which means getting ahead at others' expense by cheating, by committing fraud, by lying, and as an alternative, getting ahead, not at anyone's expense, but by doing what one was put on earth to do and trading with others who were also put on earth to do things that are not what one is doing. In other words, a person who owns a supermarket offers food for sale. A person who does not own a supermarket but needs to eat, maybe a welder, an electrician, a plumber, elementary school teacher. He needs to eat. So he does what he does in order to earn money so that he can go to the other guy's supermarket and make a trade. I will trade you some of the money I've earned for some of the food that you sell in your supermarket. That is also two people being selfish, pursuing their own particular goals, but not at anyone's expense. To acquire goals, to acquire their needs, they act as traders. That is the sense in which Ayn Rand said people should be selfish, not by cheating, lying, stealing, defrauding others, but by trading with others as equals. That is her view of selfishness, and that is the correct view that people should follow.
All right, Jerry, here's question number two then. You said the real issue is not just economic, but moral. So why is the right to keep what you earn a moral question before it is a tax question?
That is a very interesting question. It is a moral question because it is a matter of ownership, not practicality. In other words, making it an economic question does not identify the moral issues. One can have practical, recommend a practical course of action that violates the moral fundamentals. For example, tariffs. George Washington signed on to tariffs recommended by Alexander Hamilton. He thought that tariffs would conduce to American prosperity. And they could conduce to American prosperity, but did so by violating the equality all men have. In other words, domestic manufacturers benefited by the tariffs that were imposed on foreign imported goods. Western farmers, Southern planters, shipbuilders, seaport merchants, and thousands employed in the maritime trades lost. They did not benefit by the imposition of those tariffs. So the issue cannot be practical, because practical considerations could lead to immoral consequences.
All right, good answer. Last question, Jerry. For listeners who agree with you, okay, but feel overwhelmed by the size of the problem that we have in this country, what is the one practical step? the one thing they can take away to begin defending these principles again in everyday life?
Never vote for a Democrat in today's politics. In other
That's
words,
funny.
Democrats or democratic socialists want to grow government. That necessitates raising taxes. That necessitates doing more to benefit some at the expense of others. In particular, to benefit people who they say are entitled to benefits, whether they work for those benefits or not, at the expense of everyone who does work and who earns the money that they should be able to keep. So that would be one thing they could do. Never vote for a Democrat. That is not to say that all Republicans are worthy of our support. They are not, but they're much better than the Democrats.
I'd like to repeat that question again, Jerry. I think the answer you gave was good, what not to do. And I get it. I understand why you say that. But let's think of something that they can do. What's one thing that they can do besides voting for the other team, of course?
Getting involved in politics as such. In other words, Americans are very passionate about their favorite sports teams, about attending weekend games or following FIFA in today's climate. But they should get involved in politics, know who is voting on what premises, on what programs, become more acquainted with the news of the day and the personalities that are running for public office and the things that they believe. In other words, people should start favoring and supporting and donating to the candidacies of those Americans who are in politics, who want to reduce the size and scope of government, cut government spending, who support lower, not higher taxes. That is the one thing I would say Americans should do.
Now that is good advice, in my humble opinion. Get involved. Do something. As a matter of fact, go to jeromehuyler.com, JeromeHuyler.com. On there, you'll see a link to Linktree. And at the very top, you'll see resources that help you get in touch with your congresspeople. Write them a letter. Do some research. Find out who they are. What do they believe? And that'll give you a good idea, usually, on how they're going to vote, regardless what party they belong to. Democrat, Republican, Rhino, Socialist, Democratic Socialist, whatever they say they are. Find out what they believe. I agree. Get involved. Vote for the right people. Be informed, right? What you're saying, Jerry?
Yes, and in particular to those who are not currently engaged in political discourse, I would highly recommend the episode of this podcast series called "The Majority Can No Longer Afford to Remain Silent." That is my sustained argument of the importance of getting politically engaged and enraged. And what do you have to gain from getting so engaged? You will be able to keep more of the money you earned. You will learn that what you earn, you own. It does not belong to society so that Congress can take away and give away as much as it pleases. It belongs to you who earned it. And if you get involved in politics and realize that, especially in this day and age, the majority can no longer afford to remain silent, we can save the country, restore our rights, restore the proper role the government needs to play, and save our children and our posterity for generations to come.
I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, Jerry. And I think to take it even one step further, I would say to folks like myself who genuinely want to make a positive difference, who like to help people, who are trying to take our civilization, the human race, the world, whatever you want to call it, take us forward, take us in a positive direction. And there's a lot of people doing that silently, not looking for any pat on the back for it, just contributing to charity, doing whatever they do, volunteering in silence. For those people like that, the message is yes, what Jerry's saying, you will keep more of what you produce so that you have more power, more ability to then help others and do whatever good or good cause you're doing. So this will help everybody, however you look at it. Get involved. All right, Jerry. So with that, another great episode. I love it. Let's wrap it up, right? That wraps up today's episode of the Foundations of Freedom podcast with Jerome Huyler. Another great episode. Jerry, thank you again for walking us through why Ayn Rand matters, not just as a novelist, but as a philosopher, and a philosopher who challenged the ideas that have weakened America's understanding of reason, rights, property, and limited government. To me, the biggest takeaway is this. It's if America is going to recover its freedom, it first has to recover the principles that made freedom possible.
Yes.
Government was never meant to be the master of our lives, right? Or the distributor of our property. It was meant to protect our rights. So free people could think and work and build and trade and speak and worship and pursue happiness in their own way, right? For everyone listening, I want to just say make sure you visit jeromehuyler.com. Make sure you go to the Foundations of Freedom website. Subscribe on YouTube, follow it on Rumble so you do not miss the next episode or any episode. And if this conversation made you think, hopefully it did, share it with someone. Share it with someone like you who still believes that America is worth saving. Thanks for listening as always, and we'll see you next time on the Foundations of Freedom podcast. Bye, Jerry. Bye, everyone.
Rod, thank you very much once again for this, the 24th episode in our podcast series. Thank you for all you do and for your intelligent approach to the message I am trying to bring to my countrymen. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Stay tuned. Plenty more to come.
Thanks, Jerry. Bye.
Bye-bye.